In this lesson, we're going to talk about the different types of functions that you're going to see throughout Algebra 1. It's important to know that there are actually more functions beyond these types that you'll explore more in geometry and Algebra 2 and higher levels of math. But these are the 5 types that we're going to talk about this year. Let's start with this one. This is a linear function. What does it look like? It's a straight line. That's our first key feature. It's a straight line. It can go in any direction as long as it's a straight line. We can even have vertical or horizontal lines and still be a linear function. Again, as long as it's a straight line. Okay, all of these would be linear functions because they're straight lines. They go on forever. That might be another one to add in here. Go on forever or infinitely in both directions. Okay? Here's another important key feature that you might be asked to identify the function from. Its equation. Y equals mx plus b. Notice that in this equation, we have two terms. Sometimes you only have one, depending on what the slope is. But there's two terms that have no exponents. Linear functions do not have any exponents in their equation. They are straight addition and multiplication. So make sure you have these key features written down and an example of what a linear function looks like so that you can study and be able to identify it from either its picture or an equation. By the way, an example of an equation might be y equals 5x plus 2. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is quadratic. Quadratics, I mean, look at them. They're U-shaped. That's our first key feature. And you'll notice both of these pictures here, you either have this one, I like to call it a smile, or a frown, meaning that they open either up or down. You should never, ever, ever see a quadratic. You might see a picture of one, but it's not a quadratic if it opens sideways. That is not a function. If you remember our vertical line test, it would cross 2 times. So that's not a function. So you cannot have a quadratic that opens sideways. Okay? But it can open up like a smile or down like a frown. And let's talk about the equation. The equation is important because you have an exponent. It's very specific. If you have an exponent of 2, it's going to be a quadratic. Okay? An exponent of 2. So you might see something like this. Y equals x squared plus 2x plus 3. That's a quadratic function. Notice that there's 2 x's, but you have that exponent of 2. If the degree, the highest exponent, is a 2, then it's probably a quadratic function. So go ahead and write down these key features and make sure you have an example of what a quadratic function looks like. Let's talk about the next type. Exponential. Exponential functions, if you look, they start out kind of flat, and then we like to say that they explode exponentially. Okay? And then same thing here. It drops very suddenly and then kind of levels out. It never actually reaches this point. Okay? Like it's never actually, these right here are hovering right around 0, but it's never actually going to reach 0. It just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay, but it never actually reaches 0. So our key features that I have here, it starts flat and explodes up, or it drops suddenly and ends flat. And then your equation is that x is the exponent. So you might see something like y equals 3 times 4 to the x. That's a possibility. Or even just y equals 2 to the x. That's a possibility. X has to be the exponent. Okay, let's talk about the next one. All right, now we have absolute value. If you think about value and then what shape these make, these are V-shaped pictures. So you will either have one that opens up or one that opens down. Let's see. What other features do I have? That they can open up or down, yep. And then our equation. Absolute value of x, y equals the absolute value of x. So you might see something like y equals the absolute value of x plus 2. You might have something that says y equals the absolute value of x plus 3, and then a minus 5. Both of those are absolute value functions. As long as you have those absolute value bars, it's an absolute value function. And then we have radical functions. And if you look, what's really different about radical functions is that they have this start point. It does not go on in both directions like the other ones, but it has a start point and then it just kind of gently slopes up, and it just keeps gently sloping up, or it'll gently slope down. It's nothing too extreme, but it is constantly decreasing, but not at a constant rate like a linear function. It's a little more gentle than that. When we get to the unit on radical functions, we'll talk about the pattern, but it gently slopes either up or down. It has a set start point, and then the equation should have a square root in it. Y equals the square root of x. So you might see something like y equals the square root of x and then a plus 2, or you might see something like y equals the square root of x minus 3 plus 2. Both of those would be radical functions. So those are all the key features and types of functions that you're going to see in Algebra 1. Go ahead and move on to your practice in identifying the different types of functions.